prove it.
Good evening, YouTube. Happy Tuesday. It is me, Mrs. Dave the lawyer. Tonight we are finishing up. Well, I don't know if we're going to finish it up. It just depends on how long this stream goes. But we were listening last night to kind of controversial hearing. It was all about that the COVID-19 shot may be causing people to get cancer. And this was a very hot topic. This is a topic that absolutely needs to be heard, needs to be addressed, especially if it's true. And I think that a lot of the evidence we heard last night is very compelling that it may be true. But people that are big fans of Big Pharma, they don't want you to know this information. And COVID did not go the way the left wanted it to go. And it feels like they want to erase that time period from our memory. But so much stuff is coming out over the last couple of years of what really went on behind the scenes with COVID. And this hearing addresses what may have gone wrong with the COVID vaccine. Now, this is a hot topic. I'm very happy that YouTube didn't flag the stream last night. I did not get any community violations, knock on wood. But to be honest, in the past, this channel has gotten violations for streaming anything related to COVID-19 and the vaccines. And not because we were saying anything negative or our opinions on it, just merely streaming a congressional or a Senate hearing about this topic raised a flag. So hopefully that doesn't happen again. We're going to knock on wood. It's not going to happen. We're past that. So let's get started. We're right back where we stopped last night. And just to remind you guys, if you see me on my phone, I'm actually in the chat talking with you. So please feel free to get in the chat. I love it when you guys are active and lively. It's really fun to read your commentary. All right, let's get started.
We would need a randomized clinical trial where patients were equal in both arms. One would have a placebo or no vaccine, and the other would get the vaccine. And we would need to follow long term.
So observational studies, clinical observation carries no weight, has no evidence.
I think it's hypothesis generating. I do think there are major differences between people who choose to have vaccines, who are more health engaged, and those who choose not to.
So I was sent apparently a study that's going to be discussed in the June 8th to 9th President's Cancer Panel by Chairman Harvey Risch. And apparently and I don't know what this stands for, the U.S. SEER, SEER.
Surveillance and Epidemiologic Evidence Registry.
SEER is actually easy to say. This is what Dr. Risch wanted me to talk about this. Leukemias are generally the shortest latency cancers and thus would be the first empirical signs to see pandemic-related effects. U.S. SEER cancer incidence data for 2023 were recently released. It is clear that for 2023, there are substantial incidence increases above the trend line for all, both sexes, males, both sexes, for every cohort. They have instant increases above the trend line. These charts appear to be the first U.S. data showing that an association between COVID-19 infection and vaccination and leukemias may be possible and should be confirmed by additional data as they become available. Again, I think it's a pretty balanced statement, but we have Dr. El-Deary, who has just laid out plausible mechanisms, concerned. We have Dr. Dalglish, who saw it in his clinic, was highly concerned. Again, I hear from a lot of doctors also see it clinically, observationally. Dr. El-Deary talked about the cancers seeing, at the site, in the neck. I mean, wouldn't that be indications of causation? Is that something that we ought to research?
I do believe that we should research this. I think Just because there may be some biologic plausibility, because we've seen single cases where a cancer is diagnosed immediately after a vaccine or in the region, that doesn't mean it began developing at that exact point in time. So let's distinguish between when it developed and when it was diagnosed.
So let me
kind of
address
a
the other
clown.
belief where you thought it just stayed in the arm. There literally was biodistribution studies in rats that said the lipid nanoparticle would biodistribute all over the body, accumulate in ovaries and adrenal glands, that type of thing. So we do know now that they lied to us. It was going to say they are no, biodistributed all over the body. And in doing so, then this little package with modified mRNA that wasn't going to degrade is going to enter cells all over the body, in the heart, turning those little heart cells into manufacturers of a toxic spike protein that, then what does the body do when there's a toxic spike protein on a cell?
Well, I would first of all argue that what happens in mice is not necessarily what happens in humans.
No. This happened in humans. Okay, they knew it before. They knew it when they lied to us. Was going to say they knew it was going to biodistribute. That's the point of the study in mice.
That's just
they knew
a
it, and now we know it
conspiracy
because
theory.
this is
They
tripping. One
couldn't
final
have
question.
lied to us.
Does it concern you, as it concerns my other cancer doctors here, oncologists, that spike protein is being found in tumors?
I think we need to further investigate this, explore it, look at how common this is. And I am a scientist. I do believe that we should
Trust the
research,
science.
do the research, and have definitive proof, not single cases or population
There
data
is-
where the populations
I
are
would say
different.
there is no such thing as definitive proof, and we'll get to that later after Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Graylow, you are the Chief Medical Officer and Executive Vice President for the Association for Clinical Oncology, and you're a professor, you're a clinician, and your organization represents more than 50,000 oncology professionals who care for people with cancer. And your testimony, and by the way, I'm sorry I wasn't here personally, but I have read it a couple of times, is that there is, quote, no clinical evidence proving that mRNA COVID-19 vaccines cause cancer, end quote. That's the predominant view of the 50,000 medical professionals who were part of your association, correct?
Correct, and it's also a statement on our own U.S. National Cancer Institute's website, a direct quote from the NCI's website.
And your testimony, based on scientific evidence now, is that RNA, I'm quoting, breaks down quickly in the body and does not enter a person's DNA. In other words, mRNA cannot cause gene mutations, end quote. Correct? So whatever the need for more research, that's the science that exists right now. Correct?
That is the science.
And that's the science that ought to guide clinicians, and does now, in fact, guide them in prescribing vaccines for people who suffer from cancer, tragically, because COVID-19 doesn't help them if they suffer from both cancer and COVID-19, does it? COVID-19 just weakens them.
We have good data that cancer patients who are generally more vulnerable, they have weakened immune systems from their therapies. Those who got vaccinated in a couple of different registries did better, had better survival than those who did not.
The tremendous advances that you describe in your testimony, and you've just come back from a major conference, so you're about as up-to-date as possible, developing individual personalized immunotherapy based on mRNA as a platform is the result of scientific research that goes back years, correct? Maybe decades.
That's what led to the development of the COVID vaccines. We were researching mRNA vaccines to treat cancer.
The developers of the COVID vaccine, COVID-19 vaccine, were standing on the shoulders of that basic research.
Correct.
So in your opinion, how
I mean, the thing that just kind of confuses me is if we're doing all of this research and, they're specifically researching this mRNA to help prevent or get rid of cancer cases, then how come cancer's at an all-time high right now? That just is very confusing to me. There's all this money spent, all this research, and they're trying to eradicate cancer, but it just keeps getting worse. It's kind of like the homeless population in LA. We're spending more money and we're throwing everything at it to get rid of it. But when we look at the statistics, it's just getting worse. It makes you really wonder what's going on.
I want to ask this as objectively as possible. How impactful is the administration's decision ending research grants for NIH or other government agencies on basic science to the health of this nation?
I think decreasing research funding is a threat that will slow down progress. It will slow down the United States' preeminence as the hub for research, a really respected hub for cancer research.
I mean, it's really ridiculous to ask these questions to somebody with a vested interest. What she's doing depends on research money and grants and money that the government is giving for this research. What do we think she's going to say? Oh, no, give us less money. We're going to be fine. I mean, it's ridiculous. Why even ask somebody like that? Let's just continue.
Ideas like you all heard, I'm sure it was on the front page of the papers, this new RAS inhibitor that's a major breakthrough for pancreatic cancer. That started with basic research funded by the National Cancer Institute, then taken into industry, a home run, I called it a grand slam, for pancreatic cancer that's applicable to lung cancer, colon cancer. That is the kind of basic research. Everybody said this RAS target is undruggable. You could have said, then let's not investigate it. Let's stop. It's undruggable. But basic research funding from our government is what pushed ahead and found a workaround and found a way that's going to majorly impact.
Stopping it will cost lives. Correct?
Sorry.
Stopping this research will cost lives.
Absolutely.
Ms. Fel-
Or we could just stop poisoning our citizens. We know that there's particular dyes and chemicals that America allows manufacturers to put in our food supply. There's a lot of countries that will not import American food. Right now, we have the World Cup going on, and we have people from all over the world that are here in America, and we have certain teams from other countries that will not eat American food. They have brought their own or shipped their own food from their home country because they don't want to be poisoned by American food. So that would be like a really easy starting place if we really, really wanted to eradicate cancer, because we know we have to trust the science. And science has told us time and time again that toxins and dyes, Red 40, for example, is something that the science proves causes cancer. And we talked about this a couple days ago, that we know that it's a carcinogen. It's all over kids' foods. And thank God for RFK, he was able to get something passed where manufacturers have to take Red 40 out of our food, but not right away. That's what just confuses me so much. We know it's a carcinogen. We also know that it causes other issues in kids and other people that eat it. But we gave manufacturers a grace period where, they had a couple of years to wean it out of the food, even though we know that it's terrible for you. So I'm just so tired of hearing about how we just need to throw more money at these problems and just give them more and more resources and more money to research things when all the money that we've given them isn't working. it's getting worse. More people are getting these terrible diseases. More people today have cancer. And nobody wants to talk about just doing simple things that could significantly improve America's health. But we can't talk about that. We just need to throw more money at research. We just need to, have these scientists get in their lab and just research, and just shoot people up with all these research products, and then we'll find the answer. And if we don't do that, people are gonna die. People are already dying now. But not only are they dying, like, they're living miserable, uncomfortable lives. And if Congress really wanted to make a difference, and these companies really cared about the American people, like they say that they do, there's so many other ways that they could actually help and affect change immediately without having to pass a bill or having, years of oversight hearings about it. It's very, very ridiculous.
Elder, I want to thank both you and Dr. Graylow for being here today, but particularly yourself in sharing your personal story. You've had the opportunity to watch some of the administration's shifts in the CDC's main vaccine advisory panel when it comes to the HPV vaccine. What do you think is likely to happen to cervical cancer rates in this country if these baseless attacks on HPV vaccine continue?
Sadly, more people will die. And when we look at this 2 decades from now, it will be horrendous. And we also know that HPV vaccine protects from more than just cervical cancer.
And you have been through that moment when a doctor says to you, and I can't claim to quote what your doctor said to you, but in effect, I have some news I need to tell you, and we think you'll be okay, but this is serious, and here's the diagnosis. How does it make you feel, or how would it make you feel if you knew that these vaccines that could have saved a lot of lives, including maybe yours, are being attacked?
Honestly, it's infuriating at some points because no one in the United States of America should die of cervical cancer. But yet, as I read just a few names, people are dying of it. And while we have other countries, Rwanda, Scotland, Australia, who are working towards cervical cancer elimination, Denmark, there's no reason that the United States of America should be lagging so far behind.
And there's no reason we should be in lagging competition with other countries, but most important, that we should forego any kind of treatment or discourage people with myth and misinformation from seeking treatment that may save their lives, correct?
We have to really get a handle on the misinformation because misinformation causes more deaths, and we have to stop that.
Well, thank you very much. I apologize to the panel and Mr. Chairman, to you. I have a hearing of the Veterans Affairs Committee. I'm the ranking member there, and I really apologize, but I want to thank you for being here today. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ranking Member Blumenthal. Misinformation. Let's talk about one of the great lies told during COVID. It's been repeated now here a number of times. This is not normal mRNA. This is modified. So of my five witnesses, who's best qualified to describe exactly what the mRNA was in these injections? Dr. Eladiri.
So the mRNA is modified with pseudouridine.
Actually, I got that right.
This won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago. And it was a way to make mRNA stable. because
So
mRNA.
it didn't degrade. This doesn't degrade in days. I mean, my staff is just, and we'll enter this study in the record, showed me the study that 700 days. It was studied and found still circulating in the body. So that's 700 days. That's close to 2 years. And they haven't extended the study beyond that. But go ahead.
So I think more research needs to be done about the mechanisms of
More research, guys.
persistence, but it was unexpected, along with a number of other things that were observed after the vaccines were rolled out. And so you mentioned biodistribution. The contaminants that you mentioned, DNA and some plasmids.
Including SV40, correct?
SV40 origin enhancer sequences, not the full SV40 sequence, but when the SV40 enhancer promoter sequences, if they find their way into the human genome, they can drive oncogenes.
So if they're contained in that lipid nanoparticle, and the lipid nanoparticle allows the transfection of the mRNA into the cell, this DNA contaminant can enter the cell as well, correct?
The lipid
Certainly possibilities. It's certainly no clinical proof. Talk to me about that. I mean, is there literally ever definitive proof? This is, by the way, it's driving me nuts as we talk to people in the FDA, NIH, CDC that turned a blind eye toward the safety signals that were screaming at them, and they always go back to, well, we didn't have definitive proof.
So I will say that a number of different laboratories and scientists, including I think one at the FDA that published a report, and finding the DNA was not very hard. I mean, a bunch of high school students did it over the summer.
They did. It was high school students, correct? It literally was. I mean, they were using high school students.
And but the other scientists who found this and reproduced it in different labs with different vials published papers. Dr. Kevin McKernan, Dr. David Spiker, Dr. Jess Rose published a paper that looked at many vaccine vials over a number of years and documented high levels, and they compared Moderna and Pfizer lots and found much higher levels than the FDA threshold, which was developed or put into effect decades ago for naked DNA, not DNA that's wrapped in lipid nanoparticles that will take the DNA into the human cells.
Dr. Dalglish, you look like you want to add to something. Trying to address the definitive proof, because if that's what's required, we'll never warn the public about possible dangers, right? I mean, I always thought personally that the FDA's role was to search for safety signals. That's right, using these incredibly sophisticated algorithms and this mass database, looking for the small little safety signals so that they could understand that, so they could warn the public, they could warn medical doctors. They denied the safety signals, and then as we talked to them, well, it wasn't definitive proof, so we couldn't go to the American public without definitive proof. So talk a little bit about that.
Thank you very much. The problem is that people thought they understood RNA so-called vaccines. RNA is a natural messenger in the body, and it lasts about 20 seconds before it's gobbled up. So if you were to insert that, it would never be there long enough to induce an immune response. So what they had to do was make it and put a structure in it, that's the pseudouridine, so that it would last a bit longer. and they told us that it would go to the arm and it would be gone in 48 hours. And just to sum up what we're hearing is this is anything but the truth, because the important part here is the LNP, the liposomal nanoparticle, because that takes it into the center of the nucleus, whereby it can get inserted. And the thing about RNA, it is like herding cats. You cannot tell it where to go, where to insert. And remember, I sat on the board of a company developing these things, particularly for cancer, and essentially we realized that all the evidence is you will never be able to harness these things.
Because you couldn't control where it went, correct?
You cannot control the production. And just to point out how dangerous this is, this spike protein, which every single manufacturer of vaccines chose as their antigen, and which I was the first to point out it will be highly dangerous because it's 80% homologous to human epitopes. The autoimmune responses would be awful, and 131 have been reported to the FDA. So you have to accept this is an extremely dangerous thing to have pouring out of your body continually year after year, and you bring forward the chances of every chronic disease you've got, which is why those of us who've looked at the data, years and years of developing and making vaccines safe, etc., have said, no, it cannot be done. And I rest the case on that.
But there's no proof. Now, this is the second medical professional doctor witness that the Democrats have brought in here that did not understand that this was not true mRNA. I just find that shocking. And this is, I knew this from the beginning. I'm not a doctor. I was schooled in what this mechanism was. That's why there's no way I was ever going to get that injection. I didn't need definitive proof that it could cause harm. I thought this is dangerous. This is something I don't want to deal with at all. And now we just have these medical professionals that are relying on studies. And I want to get to this because the big part of this hearing is how corrupted science has become. Does it surprise any of you who have been attacked because you've conducted research as a study that's outside the narrative that disproves the fact, for example, that the mRNA is not true mRNA, that the studies that show that it has no problems, those things get funded, right? Think anybody attacks those? Talk about the Surgisphere study that tanked hydroxychloroquine during the midst of the pandemic when we were just literally, we should have been doing everything we could to treat the disease. Dr. Hazen, I think you're familiar with the Surgisphere study that totally bogus data had to be retracted, but didn't really hear much of a hue and cry in the press, did we?
No, and in fact, it was a fraudulent study that was written by a non-medical, and the media went crazy to destroy hydroxychloroquine and create the narrative that hydroxychloroquine was dangerous when hydroxychloroquine was given to millions of people with arthritis before, and we never had any problems. And all of a sudden, the study comes out of nowhere and starts quoting patients that had COVID in Australia. Australia didn't even have COVID at the time that the paper was published. So, this is the problem. You have these papers that are coming out, they get into these fancy journals. It was an embarrassment for the Lancet, frankly, because it started waking up physicians that we cannot trust the medical literature. That was the first for me. Remember, I come from the world of clinical trials, and as a clinical trial doctor, my number one thing is, yes, we look at, is the drug better than placebo, but ultimately, we also look at serious adverse events, and we also look at signals that tell us this is wrong. There were so many things that happened during the pandemic that, it changed me as a physician that was doing clinical trials, because all of a sudden I'm like listening to this, the vaccine stays in the deltoid? Nothing stays in the deltoid. Especially in the microbiome space, you get to see that anything you put on your skin, you put a topical product on your skin, it has a potential of killing your microbiome. The skin has blood vessels, has nerves, muscles underneath. So nothing that you inject or put topical just stays in that area.
Plus, isn't it true the lipid nanoparticle was literally designed
yes.
to permeate permeate, difficult to permeate. It was designed to do that. So they knew that.
Yes.
And they lied to us. That's why we don't have trust in science.
Well, that
we
was...
also don't, by the way, we also don't have trust in science because of who funds it. No, Dr. Graylow, I have to ask, who funds your organization? Who's the major funder of your society?
Our society is funded by membership, by registrations to our meetings, by industry sponsorship of our meetings, by our journal subscriptions from nonprofits and individuals.
And Big Pharma.
That was
Millions
that's the
and millions
industry.
and millions of dollars from Big Pharma.
It goes to support our meetings
Right,
or our
I know
journals.
you get millions and millions, just like the media gets billions of dollars from Big Pharma, so they don't do investigative journalism on these vaccine injuries. You know, Ms. Felder, as a survivor of cancer, wouldn't you like to know if there's a chemical or something?
But here's the thing, guys. This happens all the time. This happens all the time where we're just blatantly lied to because what's actually true is not lining the pockets of these big corporations that basically fund our politicians and fund the mainstream media. So really the lesson here is we have to have a lot of discernment. And the lesson that I've learned over the years is if the mainstream media is telling you that something is bad and they just keep repeating it and you're listening on, multiple channels, multiple streams, and they're telling you the same thing. They're doing it right now with peptides. Don't use peptides. They come from China. They're gray market. You don't know what's in them. You don't even know what's in the generic drugs that are coming from China. You don't even know that every single piece of API to make generic drugs and compounds comes from China. It all comes from China. But they're just demonizing the peptide industry because people are taking them, people are seeing great results, and people are becoming healthy, and they don't need surgeries. They don't need to take as many prescription drugs. They're active, they're getting outside, they're working out. They don't need to depend on Big Pharma because of them. And Big Pharma can't really touch them because they can't patent them. They're chains of amino acids. So now we hear this narrative about peptides that they're bad and it's dangerous and don't take them. You don't know where it's coming from. And Big Pharma has done this so much throughout history. So again, we've learned we just can't trust what these experts are saying because they're being funded by Big Pharma. I mean, the line that lady used is our sponsorships. Okay, well, her sponsorships are big pharmaceutical companies. Those are her sponsorships. And I love how she danced around and talked about memberships and this and that and what she was using the money for. That was really cute. That was really clever. But again, if you're hearing something on the news, you're seeing it all over social media, and mainstream media is talking about it, it's probably something you do want to take if they're telling you it's bad.
In the environment, or a drug or a vaccine that would increase your chance of getting cancer? Wouldn't you like to know that?
Absolutely.
So, Dr. Graylow, again, I believe, and I just want to, do you agree that the FDA and the CDC, their job, after giving emergency use authorization for something or approving something, and they're doing safety surveillance, isn't their job to look at all the data and try and suss out, try and determine where are those safety signals that we might miss? Without our sophisticated models, I mean, we've got to find those safety signals so then we can put, for example, warnings on the Health Alert Network. So to warn clinicians, be on the lookout for this. In case we're seeing more of this adverse reaction to Vioxx or to, okay? Shouldn't it be that way? Isn't that what the FDA ought to do?
Post-approval surveillance is part of the FDA's job.
Have you read our report from 4 weeks ago?
I have not.
So let me summarize it for you in the audience. On March 1st of 2021, Peter Marks, head of CBER, that's the group within FDA that approves vaccines and then does safety surveillance, was given a briefing by Dr. Anna Scharfsman. She was one of their data mining experts who was working with the inventor of the algorithm who worked with Oracle. So he was given a multi-page briefing, some of his top lieutenants, that their algorithm that they were using to analyze VAERS was going to hide in mass safety signals. And quite honestly, it's very easy to see why, because prior to the COVID injections, we had on average about 280 deaths per year reported to VAERS associated with the vaccine. 2021 was 21,000. About 10, again, roughly equal. This is just, so let's say there's 10,000 deaths associated with the Pfizer vaccine, 10,000 deaths associated with Moderna, and then 280 deaths with all the vaccines. If you look at Pfizer and compare it to Moderna, so 10,000 Pfizer, compared to Moderna, 10,280, well, they're equally dangerous, but they're equally safe. Turn around, look at Moderna at 10,000 deaths, compare that to Pfizer, 10,280, equally dangerous, equally safe. So it's obvious to me how that algorithm, when you've got such an unusual situation, two distinct injections, but compared against each other, like comparing arsenic to hemlock, that you'd hide the safety signals. So he was warned that it was going to hide them. 26 days later, Dr. Scharfsman did a data run with a new algorithm, up to date, that didn't hide it, didn't max. It showed that the system they were using had 49 cases of severe masking. Then they show them 25 safety signals. Put up the chart here. This is the first list, okay? So you've got sudden cardiac death, you've got Bell's palsy, you have pulmonary infarction, you've got stroke, you got basal ganglial stroke, a lot of things I can't, I mean, this is serious stuff. Senior officials of the FDA were shown this. For 3 consecutive months, they kept doing more data runs, showing more cases of different types of sudden death.
Sudden
So again, I would think the FDA officials go, thank you,
Sudden
Dr.
death.
Scharfsman. Man, thank you. God bless you for alerting us to this thing so we can alert the doctors, the medical establishment. You think that's what they did? No. They told her to buzz off. They told her to cease and desist. It's not your job. Go away. You're a pest. And they continued to use that algorithm that they knew were hiding safety signals so they could go to the American public to this day and lie to them and say, well, we just weren't seeing safety signals. Yeah, they saw them. They just closed their eyes.
This makes me so angry. This makes me so angry because literally the one job of these organizations is to protect the American consumer. And they actually do the opposite. And there are still a lot of people that depend on this oversight and trust the government, unfortunately, because they're watching the mainstream media and they're hypnotized and they believe this narrative and they don't realize they're literally killing themselves. It's very, very unjust and very upsetting.
And now when we talk to them, I'm asking you because you said there's no proof. When we talk to the people involved in this, that's their excuse. Well, there just wasn't definitive proof. So, Dr. Malhotra, is there ever definitive proof? I mean, definitive. I mean, absolutely, no doubt. I suppose if you shoot somebody in the brain, that's pretty, there's definitive proof of how that person died. But medically, when you die from you have all kinds of, what'd you actually die from? It's kind of hard, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, when you make a diagnosis in medicine, you go on the strength of the evidence. It's very difficult to get complete and total proof. I mean, look at what happened with big tobacco, smoking and lung cancer. The first evidence that emerged that there was a link between smoking and lung cancer until there was actually regulation curbing tobacco consumption took 50 years. Because the tobacco industry launched a campaign to deny the smoking caused lung cancer. They put out research to counter it.
Did the tobacco industry, did they buy a lot of ads on TV?
Maybe they did, yeah.
Did they possibly fund medical associations?
So on
So
that,
again, history maybe doesn't repeat itself, but it sure rhymes.
But I think on that topic as well, Senator Johnson, I think there's a few real truths that people need to understand to bust some myths here. First of all, medicine is not an exact science. We keep hearing this, Anthony Fauci uses the term trust the science, trust the science. And when I heard that, I thought, that's the most unscientific statement I've ever heard in my life. Because medicine is an applied science. It's a social science. It's constantly evolving. The father of the evidence-based medicine movement, David Sackett, said 50% of what you learn in medical school will turn out to be either outdated or dead wrong within 5 years of your graduation. The trouble is nobody can tell you which half. So you have to learn on your own. So that's one thing you have to understand. But what that means is it's open to manipulation. And if you look at the current status of the medical industrial complex, we have this misinformation mess. To quote John Ioannidis, professor of medicine at Stanford, the most cited medical researcher in the world, 2017, he wrote this paper, How to Survive the Medical Misinformation Mess. And he points out that 20 to 50% of all healthcare activity in the United States brings no benefit to the patient, is wasteful or harmful. And what is the main root cause of that problem? Because most doctors are unaware of the poor quality research that drives their clinical decision-making. The pharmaceutical companies, they direct the agenda. They design the trials, they analyze their own research, they then give summary results of their research to the regulators such as the FDA and in the UK, the MHRA. But the problem we've got now is that there's no open transparency and independence because 50 to 65% of the funding of the FDA comes from big pharma. In the UK, 86%.
So it's actually 70%. 70% of the money that the FDA specifically gets for reviewing the drugs comes from big pharma, just so you're aware.
6% of the funding comes from big pharma. So what you've created is really a misinformation mess with biases all the way through down to the, what happens in the consultation room. And ultimately what happens is you have an exaggerated safety and benefit invariably of almost every single drug, that has come on the market. And that's the real problem, the root cause of this issue that we're trying to deal with.
So, Dr. Ladiri, I'm going to put up a chart that was inside a exhibit you'd presented to us. Again.
While he's doing that, I just want to point out a couple of things. So first of all, a couple of streams ago, we learned about big pharma and testing and where they get their funding from. And the actual statistic is, I believe it was 43%, this is overall of the FDA funding. I believe it was 43% of FDA funding comes from the government, us, our tax money. 57% as a whole comes from big pharma. But what I was saying before, the specific drug reviews, that funding, 70% of that funding comes from big pharma. And we talked about this a couple days ago. If big pharma is paying your salary, paying 70% of the entire funding for this review, you're probably gonna give them a green check mark and approve their drug, right? I mean, I'm sure maybe some people that work at the FDA are ethical. I don't know, I would assume. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe they were when they started working there and had the same experience that I had when I was in the mental health field and were told, oh no, you can't put the truth down in your charts and notes. You can only put these codes in because these are the codes that we get reimbursed for from insurance. So you can't put the actual diagnosis that you think the patient has. You have to put, this list of a dozen and pick from that, and that's it. It's one of the reasons I don't work in that field full time anymore. But the other thing I want to point out to everybody, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are already aware of this. So the United States is one of the only countries in the world that allows a pharmaceutical company to advertise. I think we're one of two. Only 2 countries in the entire world allow big pharma to advertise. And if you watch TV, I usually stream or go on Amazon Prime or Netflix. I hate ads, I hate commercials, so, I usually pay for the higher tier subscription so I don't have to watch them. But every now and then I'm at a friend's house or I'm traveling and I see, a normal network And I'm like blown away that almost every other ad on TV is an advertisement for a pharmaceutical company. It's like extremely egregious at this point. Like, I'm talking about like every other ad is a big pharma ad. So what does that mean? Well, that means big pharma is paying the mainstream media and these, streaming services and these big networks a ton of advertising money. If you're seeing an ad, every other ad is for a pharmaceutical, that means that, the majority of the industry that's paying for these networks, because they make their money on advertising, is coming from big pharma. So let's think critically. If big pharma is paying these networks for commercials, and that's how, anchors and reporters are getting paid, do you think they're going to report negatively about big pharma? No, of course not. They're going to gaslight you to the max, because if they don't, they won't have a job. Is it ethical? No, absolutely not. It's so unethical. It should be illegal. And maybe this is something we can do as a community to try to get rid of big pharmaceutical ads on TV like almost every other country in the world. But again, there's nothing we can do at this moment to change it, except for just think critically and understand that if I'm watching a channel that's funded by big pharma and every other commercial I'm seeing is a pharmaceutical drug, that channel's never going to report negatively about big pharma. So you probably shouldn't believe what they say.
You've been around for quite a few years. Dr. Graylow, are you familiar with Dr. Al-Diri in the cancer field?
Absolutely, and I actually serve on the scientific advisory group for his WIN consortium for precision oncology.
So would you consider him a highly respected oncologist and cancer researcher?
I have always respected Dr. Al-Diri.
Well, somebody on PubPeer doesn't. So Dr. Al-Diri, why don't you quick explain what this chart shows, and again, the relationship to when you started publishing things like, maybe the origin of the coronavirus maybe isn't holding true. Maybe that was man-made. Is that about when that happened, about 2024? And all of a sudden you started getting all these requests for information on your past studies? Just kind of describe the torment you've gone through.
So back in 2020, a paper was published in Nature Medicine in around April, and it has become controversial in terms of pointing to the origins. And, that is when attacks started on social media. But we did some COVID research, and right from the beginning, as I said earlier, we know viruses cause cancer. The COVID virus needs to be studied for its links to cancer, and the COVID virus vaccine makes the spike protein. Now, there's a difference between COVID and HPV. The HPV vaccine.
What's a vaccine?
It helps people.
COVID is literally gene therapy.
But in the case of HPV, you're not vaccinating with E6. E6 targets P53.
Okay. But again, address the ramp up of attacks on you. Give me a timeline in terms of you publish something, all of a sudden these attacks begin.
So 2024, we published some preliminary data that if you overexpress the spike protein in human cells, you attenuate, you block the tumor suppressor, P53. This is the most common tumor suppressor.
And Big Pharma wouldn't like that, right? So all of a sudden you start getting attacked. Keep going with the...
We said, maybe if you want to develop a good vaccine, boost the immune system against the virus, but limit collateral damage to the host defenses. That shouldn't be controversial. Attacks started and continued. And then by the middle of 2020, 25, I was invited to serve on an HHS committee. I was doing government service to look into plausible links and found a bunch of things that are worth studying more. And the attacks took off. We published that work. By January, the journal where the article was published came under a cyber attack. Nobody in the world could access this paper for at least a week.
Again, this is when I was connected with you and I started hearing just your, I would call it torment. You've been tormented. They're trying to destroy your career. They're doing a pretty good job of it, aren't they?
I'll say a couple of things. You know, all of these mounting concerns look concerning. They're piling up. What's going on? Most of them are trivial, in my view. I mean, one case was a typographical error in a supplementary table where we were looking at what does the body produce in people who have severe COVID. And we spelled the word intubation, it's spelled as incubation. If you read that, that's a concern. And
I want to keep going here, but I'm going to enter in the record a blog post by Marianne Demasse that really kind of describes this pretty succinctly, the gory detail of the torment you've been going through. Without objection, nobody's going to object. I also want to make sure I enter in the record that Dr. Harvey Risch, the SEER, whatever that stands for, that study. One thing I'd recommend to anybody watching this, and these will all be posted on our website too, there was a Substack piece written by a Midwestern doctor today. He's aware of this hearing. Put up that one. This is called, again, he's doing it for this hearing, They Rigged Clinical Trials, or How They Rigged Clinical Trials, and the price we all pay for it. I mean, I think that's the point. Saying, listen, I feel sorry for you doctors who are paying a very high price being attacked because you're trying to convey the truth. You're trying to do real science, which is skeptical. You're trying to poke the holes in the consensus, right? But the people who really pay is patients. We don't have a clue. I mean, the lies told to the public, that's why a growing percentage of Americans simply don't trust doctors, would avoid the hospital like a plague, which, by the way, that'll be a hearing we'll have, is the hospital protocols. But this caught my eye in this piece right here. This is, what kind of chart is this called? There's a name for this. Pardon?
A forest plot.
There you go, yeah, forest plot. And so this shows all the different types of drugs that people studied to treat COVID. And what's noteworthy about this, if you look at everything that has a red circle around it, or a red dotted deal, they were either in the guidelines or the red dotted rectangles, they were in the guidelines. And what's notable about them is, I'll just go down the list. I can't pronounce them. Casavir, $2,100. The other one's $1,200. The next one's $855. The next one is $1,200. Then Paxlovid, $529. Sotrovimab, whatever, $2,100. Molnupiravir, $700. Remdesivir. By the way, that's what nurses call that is run, death is near, because it knocks out your kidneys. But $3,120. Last one was $5,000. But what's interesting is that with the forest plot, you get to, actually diet, it has a 50% efficacy. Everything else below that is below 50% efficacy. You know, ivermectin's up there 62% with 99 different studies, 137,000 patients. But again, this shows the corruption within our medical system. You know, random controlled trials, who can afford to run those? Dr. Hazen, I mean, you spend a lot on trials. I mean, who can, you do a lot of, I would consider more observational trials, correct? I mean, onesies and, ends of n equals 1 or whatever?
Well, right now, because I've kind of switched my my ways into looking more at the microbiome, but I mean, there was a time I was doing clinical trials for pharmaceutical companies, and yes, pharmaceutical companies pay a lot of money to do clinical trials. And what most people don't know and what the public doesn't know is that you don't know what's in Paxlovid. For all you know, it's a couple drugs that are off-label on the market, but it's a trade secret. And the problem with that is that now they can bring that trade secret into the public at a high price. So who controls that price, really? If you look at the stock market, you know, you want who's investing in these pharmaceutical companies. These stocks, you know, it's all about the price of the stock.
So again, let's get back to your, you know, so you had published out what I consider pretty important papers because, you know, again, we were, you know, you keep me up to date in terms of what you're doing. Pretty amazing stuff. I mean, you literally have nonverbal autistic children are talking. I've seen the videos, okay, and we couldn't do it because we couldn't pixelate the faces. But you've got a bunch of patients that you've treated with different maladies, ALS, you're keeping ALS patients alive?
Yes, okay. 4.5 years.
But yet you were putting, again, these are FDA basically approved or monitored trials, right? And you write the papers on it, goes through 8 months of peer review. Why do you assume they were retracted? I mean, again, there's probably no definitive proof.
You can't.
What's your conjecture?
You can't make a business out of something that's published to the public, unfortunately. And, you know, pharmaceutical companies do spend a lot of money on clinical trials, and they expect to make their money back on capital expenditures, right, that they've spent.
Which, by the way, just to plug the Midwestern Doctor, read this article because it shows you how they doctor, you know, how they rig clinical trials. This is very interesting read, okay? So if you're watching the hearing, read this one.
I've been in the clinical trial business, Senator, for 3 decades. I know all the tricks.
I understand. That's why I'm asking you to convey a couple.
Yes. So unfortunately, you know, I've always stood by one thing. Good drugs come out and bad drugs stay out, okay? When a research is done poorly, it's time to get that drug out of the market, okay? I think we can all agree, as we still have COVID amongst us, COVID has not disappeared, that these vaccines have not done what they were supposed to do, right? They have not eradicated the virus, right? We still have COVID amongst us. So therefore, we have to kind of look at, well, how do we get better? How do we get better as society? How do we stop killing the microbiome, and how do we improve the microbiome? You know, science is only as good as science is today until the new technology comes along. But when you destroy the new technology that's trying to come out, that's trying to say, hey, look at me, I'm the microbiome, and you're suffocating that and you're censoring that, you're not allowing it to progress, and you just stop science. So you just alluded to my 2 twins that resumed speech after 9 months of manipulating the microbiome to improve their microbiome, to get rid of the bad microbes, to improve their microbiomes. Do you know how many parents are asking me, can you publish that? I can't publish. Do you want to know why I can't publish or tell the data? And I have to publish because if I want to convince my peers to do what I'm doing so they can reproduce the data, I have to publish. So I can't just be on social media and say, hey, look at what I need to do.
So why don't you publish it?
I can't publish. I've had 4 papers, you know, science
because they retract them.
But it's a story, right? Science is a story untold, right? Imagine you're reading a book and you want to know the end of the story, but somebody removed chapter 4 and chapter 8 from your story. It's no longer a story anymore. You've lost the characters. This is you know, the microbiome is a story. It's a story of discovery. It's a story of finding COVID in the stools. It's a story of discovering loss of bifidobacteria in severe COVID patients. It's a story of noticing that loss of bifidobacteria happened to be in invasive cancers. It's a story of the messenger RNA killing the bifidobacteria. Therefore, you have to ask questions. Is the vaccine killing the bifidobacteria? Are these people low in bifidobacteria and therefore possibly getting...
But again, my question was, why do you think your studies were retracted? I mean, what powerful interests were you threatening?
Well,
who didn't want your studies out there?
People that are benefiting from the price of the stock from pharmaceutical products developed.
Treatments that aren't curing the diseases, basically.
Yes. They don't want precision medicine.
This is one of the better charts, and this is from way back in 2021. The blue lines, looks like one great big blue blob, those are daily new cases. And you'll notice they peaked about January 2021, just as we started the uptake of the COVID injection. Now, the pandemic was definitely, I'd say, petering out, right? You would think if the injection was that effective, that would have just continued in pandemic over, right? That didn't happen. Now, I do remember, again, contacting all these doctors, that there were vaccinologists, immunologists that were saying that the worst thing you can do in the midst of a pandemic is do a mass vaccination. It was going to drive variants. And so we had Delta, then we had Omicron. I mean, is that what happened? I do know probably that the people that were publishing those studies or those papers were probably attacked. They were dismissed, kooks. But again, does that chart look like success of the injection? Dr. Dalglish, what do you think of what happened in terms of the different variants? And
I think that chart says it all. I'd just like to point out that we suffered from people running this pandemic, the response to it, who clearly didn't understand basic aerosol respiratory diseases. They always go in cycles and in peaks and troughs till they peter out. So each following wave of infection gets less dangerous and sometimes more infectious, like Omicron, but less of a problem. And one of the big mistakes that was made in handling of this pandemic is that, so I speak from the English data, which I know well, I suspect there's parallels, is we introduced lockdown just as the first wave was disappearing. So they gave credit to the lockdown. They introduced the vaccine when the second wave was falling, hence the claim that they save millions of lives, which is completely utter nonsense, because it's only had that wave continued to go on, and it's all computer modeling that's been shown to be completely, utterly fallacious.
So let me show you a study that has not been attacked or rebutted other than from me. And you talked about saving millions of lives. Our ranking member here in a couple of hearings ago, and I'll enter this in the record. This is the study from the Commonwealth Fund, claiming that in 2021, 2022, 3.2 million lives were saved. So I've got a series of three charts here. So the first chart shows actual deaths through 2019, compound annual growth rate, this is in the US, a little under 1%. So again, population is growing, we're aging, so number of deaths per year, but it's going 2.4 up to about 2.85 in 2019. Let's show what actually happened. So here, actual deaths through 2024. So obviously in 2020, went from about 2.9 to 3.4. About 500,000 people died during COVID without a vaccine. Now, again, I would say if the vaccine was effective, particularly when new cases have pretty well plummeted by January of 2021, you'd see deaths go down in 2021. That's not what happened. We ended up with 3.5 million deaths. Came down a little bit more in 2022 to 3.3. So you got to go, well, where's the 3.2 million lives saved? Next chart. You would have to, in order to make this claim in this completely BS paper. I mean, again, I'm not a medical researcher. I mean, I'm not a troll on PubPeer. I'm just a lowly accountant who can do simple math and produce some charts. You would have to assume we would have gone from 2.85 million deaths in 2019 and expected 5 million deaths in 2021 and 2022. With a vaccine available, was going to end the pandemic. And this paper still stands. A United States Senator used this as a proof. No offense, but he brings in doctors who believe that mRNA was actual mRNA and not modified, not to be degraded in the body. Don't have a clue that it biodistributes all over the body. Really doesn't understand the mechanism that could cause cancer. But again, they just make these 3.2 million lives. I mean, obviously, you knuckleheads that are talking about vaccine injuries, you don't understand the benefit. 3.2 million lives saved. How can you spread this disinformation? I'm sorry, the disinformation's from the other side. As I said, I don't deny.
Because this is what they do. They accuse the right of all the stuff that they're actually doing. This is like their classic playbook. We're going to just accuse you of all the nefarious things that we're actually doing. So, we're distracting you from what we actually do. And we know this playbook because we're doing it right now. Like, this is just the common theme in all of these hearings. So pay attention to what, you know, these experts are saying, and then pointing the fingers at Senator Johnson. You know, they were calling people vaccine deniers, okay? What term would you call them? Like death deniers, cancer deniers? Because they're in complete denial that the stuff that they're forcing on people is literally causing deaths. And there's all of these studies that prove it. And they're just completely denying it and just asking for more money and telling you if they don't get more money, more people are going to die. It's kind of ludicrous.
Deny that vaccines can save lives. I'll deny that they save 3.2 million. There's no way. There's no way. And again, the point being here, this study, because it conforms to the narrative. I'm sure Pfizer, Moderna love this study because they just got approved for another booster without any review of the vaccine, of the injection injuries, not a review, even though Aaron Siri begged them to. Just look at it. Put up the VAERS chart one with 21 million deaths. Yeah, that one. So this shows VAERS. The number of deaths reported to VAERS associated with the vaccine going back to the start of VAERS in 1990. You can see through 2019, on average, about 280 deaths. I talked about that earlier. 2021, 21,000 deaths worldwide. Currently, the number is 39,000, I think 39. And 24% of those deaths occur on either the day of vaccination or within 1 or 2 days. Now, is that definitive proof? Do some of those people die within 2 days of something else other than the injection? Probably, maybe. But that would be something that would concern me. That would be something as a regulator who had the duty to surveil safety and warn the American public that maybe the American public should have been warned. But the American public wasn't. And again, they published these studies. So, it's actually remarkable that surge of fear was actually pulled down, but it was so, the data was completely fraudulent. Listen, I have so many questions that I prepared for you guys. It's really, again, I don't know where you begin when there's, our side gets, I get accused. By the way, there's not been one thing I've said during COVID that's been proven just wrong. I'll challenge anything I've been saying since I've been vilified and ridiculed, and there's not one thing. There may be a couple minor mistakes, but the major points I've made, all the conspiracy theories that I'm accused of, they're all true. But yeah, we get accused of misinformation. Dr. Daglish.
I just wanted to add in a couple of comments relative to what you were alluding to. But the obfuscation of the real data was an absolute disgrace throughout. The fact that it got approved on being effective on a relative risk of 95%, when the absolute risk of 0.84 was ignored. And as a clinician, I want to know how many people do I have to vaccinate to have benefit in? It was a 1 in 118. It's just not worth it. The second thing, when it comes to the side effects, that they basically said, well, we don't have side effects for the vaccine until at least 14 days, because that's how long it takes an antibody to come. So all the people who dropped down dead after 1 or 2 days went down on the list as unvaccinated because they were only included. Now, I mention this because I know...
It's how they rig clinical trials, right?
Yeah,
That's how they rig them.
So, and with regards to the claims that there's no link between the vaccines and cancer, which we hear repeatedly, like vaccines to save millions of lives. There are a couple of things. One, I don't know any other cancer doctor except for a few colleagues once they wake up who actually ask for the link. And we were told at medical school, you have to ask for the drugs and the vaccines if you're dealing with a disease you don't want to know. But one of the things which has been pointed out to me who know about these things, the CDC in 24 actually published, it was on the mainstream media, that there was 18 million people severely disabled by the vaccine in America. I was amazed to see it's been updated this year to over 30 million. I mean, this is it's continuing to rise, and this is a result of the vaccine. If you really want to know about the cancer and the vaccines, the CDC, I believe, I am informed by people who know about these things, they have separate registries. Surely they should be merged. Then we would have a much better
First
idea.
of all, you're never going to find proof when you don't look for proof, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the problem, is that they're not going to fund the studies, and they close their eyes. I mean, it was shown them, and they still denied it. Talk a little bit about, because I don't think we got an answer on this. Why is it significant that people with biopsies are seeing the spike protein in tumors? You know, why shouldn't they be there? I mean, to me, it's not obvious. I don't understand. I'm asking a legitimate question here. Why is that concerning? Why do you find that so odd that there's spike protein in tumors?
It's completely unexpected. It shouldn't be there, either from COVID infection or vaccine. How does it get there? It's a foreign protein. How does it end up in a tumor that's an expanding mass where the cells have this spike protein? How does it get there? What is it doing there? Why is it that it is 6 years later and there's very little forensic evidence? People aren't looking in the deceased to see what is happening. By
the way, could part of the answer be because the modified RNA is still circulating in the body 6 years later, and when a tumor starts, it's still attaching themselves to cells and expressing spike protein? That might be one plausible explanation, right?
Do you know what boggles the mind? You talk about hepatitis, okay? People get hepatitis. We've got tests. We can see the hepatitis antigens, the antibodies, what happens to them. 6 years later, there's no test for spike protein, for example.
Again, they didn't want to know. Talk about, because this is true, it was very rare to have autopsies during COVID, right? I know people who had loved ones die and they could not get an autopsy. I mean, who can speak to that? And then also what coroners were seeing in terms of the long white clots, the microclotting. You know, Dr. Douglas.
I can speak to that because I saw some horrendous hyper-progression of disease. It's a term that's been applied to people with certain checkpoint inhibitors. There's a few of them. But we see this hyper-progression dramatically in patients who've had the boosters. And I've seen it in friends of mine, and it's really disturbing. They don't even respond to classical therapy. And I tried very, very hard to get the tissue checked for spike protein. That no coroner would do it. And we went everywhere. No coroner would do this. So they'd been clearly told from the top down. Now, while we're talking about a test, it is very easy to measure spike protein in the blood. And I have been campaigning is that, you know, the damage this continuous spike production does is so dangerous. It's going to keep going on, and the cancer is going to keep getting worse and worse. We need to be able to measure the spike protein, simple test, which they deny and say is not needed, and then you can try some very simple things which we know help dissolve the spike protein in the body, which natural processes don't do. And several of these are available, and they're quite cheap. Things like nattokinase, low-dose naltrexone, and ivermectin, etc. Why aren't these studies being done and funded? Because they're so simple to do, and they could save an awful lot of morbidity. Because certainly in individual anecdotal cases, this works. Giving these things will bring the spike protein down toxicity. So I think it should actually be a national program to...
And to answer his questions, why aren't these being done? Because the people that are supposed to do them and protect us do not care. They don't care. They don't care about the American people. They don't care that people got these shots and had terrible side effects and are suffering. they don't care. It's all about the money. It's all about the money, and they don't want to lose their piece of the pie. And so they will gaslight you to the max and tell you that what you saw you did not see to protect their narrative. They'll never admit that they knew that this was going to happen, or even if they didn't know and they did have good intentions, which I highly doubt, they're never going to admit that they were wrong and that this is actually happening. And that's really sad. It's really sad for people that did trust the science, that did trust the pharmaceutical industry, that did trust their physicians, and were just being a good patient and trusted medical professionals to have their best interest at heart. And now they're suffering, and a lot of them, unfortunately, are dead. And they just cannot do the right thing. They have to protect themselves and their narrative and their wallets. And I don't know, I don't think there's anything that we could do to change that fact. The only thing that we could do as a community is get together, talk to the right people, write letters, talk to our congressmen and our senators, and try to get these things to change, bring these things to light, talk about these things. It doesn't have to be, online or on social media. Just talk about these things to anybody that'll listen to you. Just spread the word and make sure that people are actually hearing the right information. Just being able to change one person's opinion and maybe helping them go onto the right track to get, the right type of treatment that they need to maybe reverse some of the side effects they're dealing with. That's all we need to do, just one person at a time.
So, to check this and sort this out.
So, Dr. Graylow, not to pick on you, but why don't we conduct these studies?
Well, I'll tell you, I had an opportunity to talk to our NCI director, Dr. Tony Latai, this past week, knowing I'd be coming to this hearing, and he suggested we both support continued surveillance. We both support continued research in this. He suggested that the NCI has an ongoing CONNECT trial with 200,000 Americans who have not had cancer when they enter, and it's looking at causes of cancer and cancer prevention. There are lots of different cohorts with proposed different potential causes of cancer, and this could be one. They're collecting blood, they're collecting tumor. So he is very supportive of studying this in an ongoing cohort of 200 Americans where they know everything about the patient's history, they're collecting blood. I don't know what, they're probably collecting other things. And then if they get cancer, they're collecting the cancer. So there is a mechanism that we've talked about where we could further study this.
Dr. Moser, I know I wanted to ask you, because you did your study, claimed 3 million excess deaths. I mean, how did you come up with your numbers? And again, try and keep it pretty high level, and so we can understand it and pretty brief, and as loud as possible. I really can barely hear you. You got to get the.
No, in our study, we assessed excess mortality as the deviation between the reported number of deaths in a country during a certain week or month in 2020 until 2020, and the expected number of deaths in a country for that period under normal circumstances. For the baseline of expected deaths, historical death data was used in a country from 2015 until 2019, and all-cause mortality reports were abstracted for countries of the Western world using our World in database, their reported number of deaths from the Human Mortality Database and the World Mortality Data Set.
And again, all you did is publish your results.
Yeah.
And so we're not saying anything causes. It's just this is something that ought to be looked into. And rather than looking into it, they attack you, and you end up having to resign and find a new career, I guess. Dr. Ildiri, you looked like you wanted to say something.
I want to make a couple of points and maybe discuss this with Dr. Graylow about a population signal versus a risk of developing cancer or other diseases. So we know in medicine that everybody has different risks. And one of the questions that I think is important to answer is what is a specific patient's risk of side effects from the COVID vaccine, and what is the risk of cancer, however infinitesimal it would be. You know, the numbers really matter. Many decades ago, my daughter was born, and she had a hypoxic brain injury during her birth. And nobody ever told me about what those risks were. Is it 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000? I didn't know, and I'm a doctor. And I have to live with those consequences for the rest of my life. If I knew there was a chance of this that could have been prevented by a C-section, I would have had that done, and my daughter could be a beautiful person, functional in society. And so these things are really important. For the people who are harmed, what are their risks? We know people have very different risks of developing cancer. It's 6 years later. The things need to be nuanced. What is the relationship with the number of shots as far as the effects of the vaccine? We need
But again, we're not getting those studies because the people who, just pretty simple study, here's some plausible mechanisms of how the spike protein could cause cancer. They're destroying your career. So it doesn't take a dictator, very many people to hang in the city square before, like, people stop behaving, right? And the same thing with the doctors been attacked. Their licenses were threatened. They were fired. They were sued. That's why you didn't have very many people doctors treating with ivermectin, did you, Dr. Hazen? I mean, how many doctors do you know whose careers were destroyed because they had the courage and compassion to try and treat patients with, and we showed, I mean, ivermectin was up there in terms of effectiveness. By the way, it's kind of hard to blame him, isn't it?
Very few doctors during the pandemic had the courage to treat, and I think partly because, yes, doctors are afraid of losing their licenses, and
by the way, they often have $200,000-$300,000 worth of debt.
yeah, and then you're looking
They have
at
a family to take care of. They went through all this. They want to continue to practice medicine because they want to save people's lives, like they saved my daughter's life with transfers to great arteries. And so I understand it, but it just shows you how effective the attacks are. It doesn't take. They don't have to make an example of too many people like Dr. Eldiri, or you, or Dr. Mostert, or Dr. Malhotra, right? It doesn't take many.
Here's the problem. In order to reach a cure, we need to have bravery and courage to practice medicine. And if we don't have courage, we can't treat. You know, I stood on the front line of COVID, unaware. Really, at the beginning, I was kind of scared of the virus. And then I treated my first patient, my second patient, my third patient, my patient number 1,000, 2,000, and I'm still standing. And I learned something. I learned the microbiome. But I realized that I was trained to be in this position. You know, I was trained as a physician to cross those roadblocks, to have courage, because I work with the FDA I've worked with the FDA on multiple protocols for pharmaceutical companies. So I've developed that courage to say, no, this is a serious adverse event, needs to be reported to the FDA, and that drug needs to be shut down. But not every doctor has that training, unfortunately. And by the way, for me to do those protocols of hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, which, you know, I paid, you know, and I asked myself, that study of the vaccine pre and post that showed messenger RNA killed the microbiome, that was 2 Lamborghini Countach, right? Or whatever. But the fact is I spent it. And today I ask myself, what if I didn't spend it? Were we supposed to get a vaccine every 3 months the rest of our lives? Are we a bunch of sheep that are just going, you know, down the road and listening to pharma and nobody's questioning the data, nobody's questioning, you know, what we're supposed to do, how to defend ourselves? I discovered the microbiome during the pandemic. It was the light at the end of the tunnel. It was hope. And without hope in medicine, we have no medicine.
So part of the problem, as I've seen it over the last few decades here in America, and I think in England it's been longer, with the national health care, but we used to have independent doctors. And, the doctor has the primary responsibility of the patient, and they used to sit at the top of the treatment pyramid and practice medicine. By the way, I really did learn the meaning of the word practice medicine with my daughter with transposition. She had an atrial switch versus arterial switch because they hadn't practiced medicine enough to do it the other way. But anyway, so doctors...
They're just practicing medicine, just like they're just practicing law. They're just practicing. Believe people when they tell you who they are. Believe people when they tell you what they're doing. Words are powerful. We have so much cognitive dissonance in this country that literally these people tell you what they're doing, and you just can't fathom it. It doesn't register. One of the, top vaccine endorser billionaires on this planet, you guys know who I'm talking about, Mr. Microsoft. He loves to travel the world and vaccinate the world. And what is something that he likes to say on camera? That he thinks the world is overpopulated and we need to depopulate our planet. So believe people when they tell you who they are and what they're doing. Just put two and two together. It's not even common sense. It's just having discernment and just using your listening skills.
Need to practice medicine, but right now they're being crushed at the bottom of the pyramid because now they're all hired hands. The hospitals can fire them, they can sue them. They practice protocols handed down but by people like Anthony Fauci, who out of the blue said, no, remdesivir is going to be the standard of care, even though the WHO said you shouldn't use remdesivir. And the nurses sure didn't want to use it. But man, was it profitable for the hospitals, for the drug companies. And again, that's what the American public has to understand is the corruption of medicine, of medical education, of science, of medical, it's been corrupted. And it's awful. It's got to be fixed. But the only way we fix it is if we own up to it and we admit it.
But they won't.
That's really what this hearing's about, is let's come to terms with how broken this system is and how you're only going to get the studies that's going to confirm Big Pharma and their patentable drugs that has driven up the cost of health care. We're not curing diseases, we're treating it at a very high profit level. And I come from the private sector.
So why don't we take the money that we give to immigrants that are running these fraudulent home health care and child care rings and sending all that money back to Somalia and Philippines and all those other countries I can't even pronounce. Why don't we take that money that's going to egregious fraud and use that money to fund the FDA to actually do its job and protect American consumers instead of relying on Big Pharma to pay for 70% of FDA review. That would be a good idea. Don't you guys agree? We should do that, right? Maybe it's a bad idea that Big Pharma funds our FDA. Maybe it's a conflict of interest. And also, maybe we should be like every other country except for one on this planet that does not allow pharmaceutical companies to market themselves and advertise on television. I think that could help a lot of things, guys. What do you guys think?
When I first ran in 2010, my campaign guy said, never say that again. I said, I'll defend Big Pharma and Big Oil. Am I the only one that wants a new life-saving drug? We need medical researchers. We need drug companies to do this. But man, we need, first and foremost, integrity restored to science because it doesn't exist. I don't think it exists anymore.
And by the way, that's the future. The future is actually robots replacing the doctors. So we've lost humanity. We've lost the ability to hold the hand of a patient. Think of what happened during COVID. We were putting gloves on people's hands because we were afraid, doctors and nurses were afraid of touching these patients because we instilled fear. Because fear sells products.
I talked to a senior surgeon, older guy like me, would be scared to death of undergoing surgery now. Because young surgeons, they don't touch patients anymore. They use robotics and stuff and just don't, they haven't got the just depth of skill of feeling what you need to feel to be an effective surgeon. It's scary stuff. We need to, here's what also scary. And Ms. Felder, you understand this, being a cancer patient. Again, having lost confidence, knowing how they sabotage early treatment with cheap generic drugs, there is a observational study. Actually, Dr. Harvey Risch is one of the authors, as is Peter McCulloch. And it's apparently 200 cancer patients treated with ivermectin and mebendazole. So I've got some oncologists here. I mean, is that something you're willing to take a look at? Because trust me, I know people have cancer, and they are looking for anything other than the poison that chemotherapy is. Might extend your life a little bit, but and I know we're making some progress and stuff, but man, that's a nasty cure. People are begging for, again, true science. Take a look. I mean, are some of these things effective? I mean, this looks pretty effective, but I'll go to the oncologist here, Dr. Dalgi.
Wow, I can't believe Senator Johnson just called that out. I spoke about that yesterday because I am a certified oncology esthetician. And one of the things I said was when I was going through that certification, I had called Dave the lawyer. We were engaged at the time, and I told him, hey, listen, man, I love you, but if I ever got cancer, I'm not doing these treatments. It just sounds awful, and I think that there has to be another way, but I don't think if I got that diagnosis, I would do chemotherapy or radiation or any of these treatments. And I can't believe that Senator Johnson just called that out. Wow, he's doing a great job. I'm really impressed with him.
I mean, is that something you think has promise, or are there other, peptide? I mean, I've heard all kinds of things here. Dr. I think it's Buzinski. Kessler tried to destroy him, but he's still practicing down in Texas. Just talk about alternate treatments of cancer.
Well, one of the things about cancer is that what you can use is very limited to what Big Pharma are going to choose and do. And we know that it's not done for the benefit of the patients, it's done for the benefit of the markets that they create. And I've heard 3 people from Big Pharma all tell me they're not interested in cures, they're interested in the markets. And that brings us to the attention of what the patients actually want. And the patients want sort of cheap, non-toxic drugs that might work. And the most amazing thing is that if you look and scratch the surface, we have an enormous number of them that are really quite effective. And I make no bones about it. I'm very interested in low-dose naltrexone, which seems to enhance people with cancer to any other chemotherapy, immunotherapy, etc. But there are many, many others out there, artesunate, etc., that have been shown to have interesting anti-cancer activity. So they're being repurposed. And of course, the 2 big ones are ivermectin. And people forget this. Ivermectin, we were told we were not to use it, certainly during the pandemic. Now we know why, because it was the most effective drug by far, with a few competitors, but it was so good. And in 2 extreme cases myself, I authorized it to be used. People did not want to go into hospital, even though they were breathless, because they were convinced they were going to die if they went in, and I think they were probably right. But within 24 hours, they're both much, much better. And then Pierre Corey, of course, has written a beautiful book, The War on Ivermectin. Now, it looks like some of these people had cancer, and that there is a real role for looking at these anti-parasite things.
But do they have a chance? I mean, I'll go to Dr. Do these therapies have a chance? I mean, with Big Pharma, again, demanding random controlled trials, get the observational stuff, only expensive patentable drugs.
I stay open-minded. I mean, just up the road from here at Johns Hopkins, one of my colleagues has been looking at mebendazole for brain cancer. I mean, these agents do affect the immune system, and we need to learn about them and study them.
How are we going to do this? I mean, we're going to make this available to the people who just want to try something different. I mean, again, people are having, I know they can't get these kind of treatments. They have to go to just.
The sad thing is he's absolutely right. But in our country, Western medicine has demonized natural treatments. Anything inexpensive from the earth, even things that, were used for thousands of years and are still used in some other countries that are effective treatments, are basically called like quackery now in the US. If it's not, these Western Rockefeller practices, we're told that it's a scam. It doesn't work. It's quackery. It's antidotal. But the reality is, like I said, like people have been using these inexpensive therapies and treatments for thousands of years, and they still use them in some other countries. But we're told that no, the only effective way to treat a disease like cancer is to just pump somebody full of like millions of dollars worth of like toxic chemicals. That's not for me. Absolutely not.
There are very few doctors who are willing to do it. I mean, the cancer centers won't do it. Is that largely true? I mean, Dr. Graylow, really not.
But here's the thing also, because we do live in America and we do have a choice. We can choose to not go that route. We can choose that if we get diagnosed with something like that, we don't have to utilize those treatments. Now, before you say anything, yes, if you rely on insurance, you may, have to stick with the treatments that your insurance approves. But again, you always have a choice. And you can choose to put money aside that if you did get diagnosed with something like that, like you could utilize other treatments. You don't have to go down that route. So we do have a choice in America, which is great. And, we're in like the height of information at our fingertips. You just have to know where to look, but everything is available for you. You could literally go to PubMed and look up research studies on your own. You don't have to rely on your doctor anymore. You don't have to rely on what the mainstream media is telling you. That's just really being lazy. We can take control over our own health by doing our own research, and all the information is out there for us. We just need to put a little extra effort, read these things for ourselves, and use a little bit of discernment. But we all have that available here to us in America.
Pick any now. What can we do? I mean, is this something that your society is looking at? I mean, would they look at, cheap generic drugs that don't have the type of toxicity that some of these chemotherapies have?
I think this speaks to the role of the need to sustain federal funding. I agree. Industry is not going to do those trials. They don't have a vested interest in it. These are cheap drugs. These are the kinds of trials that our government should fund.
By the way, I completely agree as long as that funding isn't corrupted in some way, shape, or form,
I will tell you that at last year's big annual meeting, we had very preliminary data in a subset of breast cancer looking at an immune checkpoint inhibitor with ivermectin added. It showed there were some responses. It did not prove the responses were any higher than if it was immunotherapy alone, but they proved a safe dose and combination, and that trial, which is federally funded, will continue to try to see if it was more than the immunotherapy alone.
I'll just tell you, because patients are just begging for it. They really are. They just, a lot of people are just, I'm not going to be treated at all. Dr. Hazen.
You started the Right to Try Act, and that's exactly why the Right to Try Act was designed for. Unfortunately, the Right to Try Act is very difficult to allow terminal patients to have access to anything. Personally, a person that's dying should have access to anything they want. My only concern...
The reason it's not as effective is because we had to water it down so the big pharma wouldn't tank it. That's the truth. We had to back it way down, make it pretty exclusive, so the primary benefit of Right to Try is the title. Okay.
Yes, but the paperwork to get that right to trial approved for a patient is very difficult for a practitioner to do. The other thing that I wanted to say with these patients is, they have the right, but my concern with hearing about ivermectin and fenbendazole on social media and not having the right research backing it up is patients that have an early cancer, tend to want to go the route of ivermectin, fenbendazole, and could have just had a surgery to resect that stage 1 cancer, but now they've delayed the cancer and it's stage 4. So I think this is why we need to do good research, and this is why we cannot stop the publications, again, of research. And I want to encourage all these physicians that are out there using ivermectin and mebendazole to publish your data so that we, the physicians that are doing clinical trials, can criticize it. It doesn't have to be retracted. It could stay there so someone else can come in and say, you know what, I proved that person wrong and it didn't work.
I mean, don't you think doctors themselves, you don't want snake oil salesmen out there. You don't want, corrupted science, but you don't want this happening either. And again, I think people admit that PubPeer, the way it was initially run was probably the right thing to do. It was valid, but then something took it over. And now the nickname is PubSmear. So that again, we're trying to at least highlight that to maybe stop that abuse. But there's got to be, I mean, from my standpoint, it's like publish the papers and have your own reputation be the thing that really guides you in terms of not publishing junk. And if you publish junk, I mean, pretty soon you're, I mean, like real junk, not being tormented with a bunch of spelling mistakes and stuff.
The medical community is very critical of papers to begin with. And if a paper passes peer review, it needs to stay.
But talk about peer review, because we've talked about this.
Yes.
I mean, that's not exactly pure either, is it? Because you don't have any control who those peers are, and you'll sometimes get peers that have a different patent or a different drug, and they want to destroy your research. So, I mean, that's part of a problem.
There's a problem in that area as well. But, I mean, for the majority of peer reviewers, I'll give you an example. The paper that was in Gut Pathogen that was retracted, the landmark paper of finding COVID in the stools, the journal is now asking me to peer review another paper because I'm considered the expert in the microbiome space. I find it funny that they retracted a landmark paper on COVID and now are asking me to peer review a paper on long COVID.
Funny is probably not the adjective I use. Dr. Malhotra.
Yeah, I just want to what really important point here is that, when it comes to randomized controlled trials, when, doctors are making decisions on non-transparent data, the peer reviewers of those trials don't have access to the raw data. So they're making decisions on data that isn't transparent. And so we have to go further upstream, Senator Johnson. In my view, with everything that's happened over the last few decades, we see the excessive use of medications. We have estimates, the third most common cause of death globally after heart disease and cancer, according to one senior Cochrane reviewer, is prescribed medications because of avoidable side effects. I mean, that is extraordinary. And that can be corrected if in the future we say enough is enough. Drug companies can develop drugs, but they can no longer test their own products, and we just rely on their results. That has to change. Until that changes, medical knowledge will still be under commercial control.
I've kind of run out of questions. We've covered an awful lot of ground here. I guess what I'll do is I'll give everybody a chance. If there's something that you want to get off your chest here, something we haven't discussed and you want to discuss, so let's do it. But keep it reasonably short. But we'll start with Dr. Dalglish.
I think we need to just reiterate that great difficulty, the censorship that we've experienced. I mean, right at the beginning, my colleagues and I noted that the sequence of the virus clearly had positive inserts into it, and this meant that it come from the laboratory. There could be no other explanation. And we submitted it to the journals, and they all rejected it with exactly the same thing. We have no problem with the science. It is not in the public interest. How come Nature, Science, Cell, Virology, and The Lancet all used the same words? It was like they were expecting it and to be buried. My university told me we were not allowed to research the origin of the virus. It's a suppression of something that I thought it was probably going into Stalin's communism or something. We were no longer allowed to discuss the truth, to discuss science, even if it was flawed, to discuss with other people. It was completely verboten. I've never thought that I would ever come to see that, but it has not stopped. It is not stopped. It still continues. We can't get papers published on things they do not want. They come back, and with the peer review, they nitpick absolutely to the point where, you know, what's the point? They clearly don't want good data being published. So we must not forget that here we have had people who've lost their jobs, who've been totally targeted. And the big thing is why? Why? And I must say, when you get into a dystopia like this, you have to say cui bono. You know, who is benefiting it?
And an insight I can give you from our investigations, what we've seen in talking to folks, is a very major goal causing this is you cannot create vaccine hesitancy. So anything that, you know, any truth, you know, any injection injury that might alarm the public that just could cause vaccine hesitancy, they'll rely on that. Say, well, no, I mean, okay, we maybe should have warned the public. Okay, but
ask yourself, why is that a thing? Why is it dangerous to have vaccine? What was the term he said? Like, why should we be scared of vaccines? Like, why is that a bad thing? Why should we? I mean, I already know the answer. You already know the answer, but it's just kind of shocking that this is the mission that they're on, that if anything scientifically proven undermines and makes people scared of getting a vaccine, it's not allowed to be published. Doesn't that like violate our freedom of speech? I don't know if it does or not. I don't know what the rules and the laws are concerning like medical studies and stuff like that. I definitely want to look into that this week. But I just thought, like, in America, you could say what you want to say. And I guess these people could. I mean, they're not, like, getting in trouble, like, with the law. But their lives are basically being ruined, and they're being discredited and shunned from the medical profession if they go against the narrative. And I think that tells you everything right there.
Had we warned the public, that would have created vaccine hesitancy. And again, because we saved 3.2 million lives, we certainly can't deny people that injection because, okay, that's, I mean, I think that is driving a lot of this. And of course, why don't you want to create a vaccine hesitancy? Because you don't put billions of dollars in the big pharma's pockets because they have no liability for these vaccines. And it's just a big money-making center. So yeah, and they got the money, and then they buy the ads, and they invest in medical journals, medical associations, medical colleges. That's the grift that's going on here.
My one sentence answer to that is it is time to withdraw the 1986 Vaccine Indemnity Act.
But no, I agree. I agree. Dr. O'Leary.
Well, I've got a few things I want to get off my chest.
Keep it short.
Yes. So in science, we need to be able to think creatively and talk with each other and discuss things in a civilized manner, with mutual respect and not being dismissed as irrelevant or whatever. And that's a big problem these days. I think some of the issues we're talking about also have to do with informed consent. A lot of things, I don't believe we have informed consent for COVID mRNA vaccines. I do want to clarify, the comment was made that we've been doing mRNA research for decades. It should be clear to everyone the pseudouridine modified mRNAs were used for the first time in the population in the COVID pandemic. Never before, first time ever. And so, there needs to be more oversight of these things and more modern regulations of what's allowable as contaminants, with the lipid nanoparticles. The comment was made about elsewhere about how fast these tumors grow after the COVID vaccines. And I will say that we've known for a number of years, one of my colleagues, Dr. Razel Kurzrock, one of the premier clinical trialists in the world, noticed that people who get cancer immunotherapy, a small percentage of them, their tumors grow. It's called hyperprogression. I don't use the term turbocancer, but hyperprogression is understood. And there's also pseudoprogression that happens when people get cancer immunotherapy. And you have to tell the difference between those two, because the pseudoprogression is a mass that looks like it's getting bigger because the immune system is fighting it. And so, you know, some of the things that have been reported of these tumors that seem to be popping up and growing really quickly, that may not all be tumor cells that are dividing. I mean, it's the immune cells that are going in there. You get these swellings. And in the end, most of us probably carry cancer cells in our body that are being eliminated by our immune system. And so, you know, we just need to understand more. We need to do science. We need to let scientists do science, ask questions. We need to support it. I am all for support of biomedical research. And, you know, if we want to be America first, we need to do that. But the environment is pretty toxic as far as how people are disparaged. I mean, you know, there's certain, you just can't ask the questions.
So let's just unpack what he just said, because that was very important. Basically, what he's saying is that there's a very high chance that all of us carry cancer cells within our body at any given time. But if you're somebody that's healthy and has a strong immune system, your body is fighting those cells, those cancer cells. It's fighting them off. Your immune system is fighting them. And I think that is something that's known. Maybe it's not. Maybe most people don't know that. That's something that I know about. But anyways, hearing that, it just makes me wonder if that's a known fact that people could have cancer cells at any given time and, you know, their immune system's just fighting it. It's never going to become anything more than that cell or whatever. It makes me wonder, like, when they do all these screenings and they tell you you have this type of cancer and that type of cancer and then force you to pump yourself full of like toxic chemicals, did you really need to do that? Like, could your immune system have fought it off? Cancer's a big business. And most cancer doctors or oncologists, they actually make their money, I believe, I'm almost positive this is true, but I'm just going to say I believe, because I'm not 100% sure. I believe that most oncologists make their money on the cancer drugs and the treatments they're prescribing. So there you have your motivation on why they would just want to give out these diagnoses, why we have all this research, yet cancer's at an all-time high, and that these very, very expensive drugs and protocols are being pushed. But anyways, it's pretty late here on the East Coast, and this is a very long hearing. Thank you guys so much for being with me tonight. This chat was great. I will be back here tomorrow night around the same time, and we will finish up this hearing. I hope everybody had a great time, and I hope everybody has a great night.